Welcome to our deep dive into something pretty fascinating. I think nostalgia, that warm, fuzzy feeling we get when we think about the past. But what we're going to explore today is how nostalgia itself is changing in the age of the internet.
Interesting.
Yeah, it really is. We have this really insightful piece as our source material, and it really makes you rethink, those trips down memory lane.
Yeah, what's really interesting to me is how the author points out that it's not just what we're nostalgic for that's changing, but the way we experience nostalgia, like the whole process is different now.
Yeah, and the piece really starts off talking about how younger generations, they have instant access to basically all of history, all of pop culture, music, movies, fashion trends. It's just a click away. And, that's not something those of us who grew up pre-internet ever experienced.
It's like going from your local library to having the entire Library of Congress just like right there in your pocket.
Yeah.
And that kind of on-demand access, I mean, it has to change our relationship with the past.
Yeah.
It just has to.
Absolutely. The author who grew up in the 70s talks about how back then, if you wanted to learn about older music, you would have to hunt through record stores or wait for a specific issue of Rolling Stone to come out at the newsstand. I mean, it wasn't as easy as making a Spotify playlist.
Right. And that limited access, you know what I mean? It meant your relationship with the past was different. There was this anticipation, a sense of discovery when you finally found something. It was special.
It's true. So with all this instant access, we have now the author suggesting that nostalgia is getting well compressed, like the 80s are the new vintage cool, even for people who, weren't even alive then. And it kind of makes me wonder, is our collective memory actually shrinking? And what does that even mean for how we understand, who we are?
It's such a good point. I mean, imagine in the 70s being a teenager and your music tastes gravitating towards the 50s, that's a 20-year span. Now it seems like that gap is shrinking. So Are we losing touch with, those deeper layers of history that really shaped our present? I don't know. It's something to think about.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And here's another layer to all of this. It's not just about passively taking in culture anymore, is it? I mean, it used to be about listening to music or watching movies, but now the author points out there's this huge shift towards actively recreating and remixing the past. Everybody's making YouTube videos, documentaries. They're making their own music inspired by these bygone eras.
And technology is really the driving force behind that.
Yeah.
It's so easy now to become a creator, to share your own take on the past.
Yeah.
I mean, think about music. You used to just listen to your records or the radio. But now it seems like making videos about making music, about the process, the gear, it's just as important.
Yeah, it's a total shift from appreciating something to reinterpreting it and putting your own spin on it. I'm curious, do you think that's a good thing? Does it deepen our connection to the past, or does it kind of make it all a bit more superficial?
That's a great question, and it leads us to another point the author makes. They warn that just because the internet is this vast ocean of information doesn't mean we're actually getting a complete or balanced understanding of the past.
So just because it's all out there doesn't mean we're absorbing it accurately.
Exactly. We could be cherry-picking information to support the views we already have.
Yeah.
Focusing on snippets and sound bites instead of really digging deep. And, there's a danger of ending up with a distorted view of history shaped more by our own biases than by actual events.
It seems almost paradoxical, right? We have access to more information than ever before, but real understanding still takes effort.
Absolutely. Critical thinking and the willingness to go beyond the surface. Those are still so important. Maybe even more so now. It's not enough to just have access. You have to engage with it critically.
Okay, now for a concept that might seem a bit out there at first, the author brings up this idea of morphic fields or morphic resonance to explain how we connect with pop culture icons like James Dean or Elvis.
It's a fascinating concept. I mean, it suggests that we might be tapping into some sort of collective memory or a field of information that exists beyond our individual minds. Think about it. Even if you've never seen all of James Dean's films, you still have a sense of who he was, the rebellious spirit, the tragic ending, that feeling it comes from somewhere.
Right, and the author uses examples like birds figuring out how to open milk bottles or people solving crossword puzzles more easily if similar ones have been solved before.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder, are we somehow tapping into this morphic resonance with figures like James Dean? Are we absorbing their essence from the culture around us?
The idea is that repeated exposure to certain ideas or archetypes, it creates this sense of pre-knowledge, even if we don't know all the details. It's like we're picking up on a frequency or a pattern that's already inside of us.
So it's not just about knowing, the facts of their lives, but about connecting with something deeper, something almost intangible. And maybe this morphic resonance explains why certain figures continue to hold such power over our imaginations, even decades after their time.
For sure. And that raises an interesting question. How much accuracy do we actually need for a historical narrative to resonate with us? Is getting the gist enough, or do we need to really delve deeper to truly understand the past?
You know, it reminds me of how we often talk about historical figures in these almost mythical terms. We condense their lives into these simplified narratives that maybe aren't entirely accurate, but they capture a certain feeling or essence.
Right. And with the internet and its focus on quick, digestible content, it's possible that this trend towards, truthiness over meticulous accuracy is only going to become more pronounced.
That's a lot to think about. We've only just scratched the surface of this topic, so let's take a short break and come back to delve deeper into how these ideas play out in our digital world in part 2 of our deep dive. Welcome back. We're continuing our deep dive into nostalgia and, how this very human feeling is being reshaped by something as powerful as the internet.
Yeah, and, we're about to get into how this all connects to something really relevant to everyone listening, the ways we use history to reinforce our own beliefs and values.
Yeah, sometimes without even realizing it, right?
Exactly.
The author points out that there are a couple of main ways that people tend to view the past.
Right. One way is this idea that things have been steadily going downhill since the 1950s.
Yeah.
It's almost like a cautionary tale, a warning against repeating the mistakes of previous generations.
That classic "things were better back in my day" mentality. You hear that a lot, even from people who weren't even alive then.
Exactly. But then there's the flip side. There's this whole romanticization of rebellion. This idea that the past is full of examples of people challenging the status quo, and that should inspire us to do the same.
Like that just do it spirit that the author talks about, which has been woven into American culture for decades, maybe even centuries.
And you see that theme of revolution everywhere, from music and art to even advertising.
I never thought of it that way.
I know, right? The author even uses the example of those Dodge Rebellion ad campaigns, that idea of pushing boundaries, forging your own path. It's powerful stuff, and it taps right into that sense of American individualism. And they're still using that campaign today, even though it started decades ago. I mean, that says something about its lasting appeal.
It really does. It makes you wonder, how do these different interpretations of history actually influence, our choices and behaviors today?
It's a good question to think about. Let's say you believe the world was objectively better in the past. Well, you might be more hesitant to embrace change, or you might even try to recreate elements of that bygone era in your own life.
Like those people who are obsessed with mid-century modern furniture or vintage clothing. It's like they're trying to bring back a certain aesthetic.
Exactly. But on the other hand, if you see the past as this call to action, you might be more likely to challenge the status quo and push for, radical change.
So someone with that perspective might be drawn to social movements or political activism.
Precisely. And here's where the internet adds a whole new dimension with its, unlimited information and diverse perspectives. It could be this really powerful tool for reinforcing either of these views.
It's so easy to find evidence to support any historical narrative you're already inclined to believe. If you think society is crumbling, well, there's a whole corner of the internet dedicated to confirming that belief.
And if you're looking for inspiration from past rebels and revolutionaries, well, you can find endless examples online, so the internet can actually amplify our existing biases when it comes to how we perceive history.
That's kind of unsettling, actually, if we're all swimming in this sea of information. How do we sift through it all and form a balanced, accurate understanding of the past?
That's the million-dollar question. The author doesn't offer a simple answer, but they do stress the importance of critical thinking and self-awareness. Recognizing our own biases is crucial.
It's almost like we need to develop a healthy skepticism towards everything we encounter online, especially when it comes to history.
Exactly. And we also need to remember that our understanding of history is often based on those metaphorical truths we were talking about earlier, rather than a collection of, perfectly verified facts.
Right. We talked about how sometimes the gist of a historical event or figure might resonate more deeply than a perfectly accurate but kind of dry account.
And with the internet's focus on quick, digestible content, it's possible that this trend towards truthiness over meticulous accuracy is only going to accelerate.
So we're left with this really intriguing question in this digital age where we're all drawing from this same vast pool of information. Are our interpretations of history becoming more similar, more homogeneous, or are we simply finding new and creative ways to express our individuality through our own personal versions of nostalgia, even within this shared digital landscape?
That's a great question to ponder. We'll delve into that further when we return for the third and final part of our deep dive.
And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into nostalgia. in the digital age. We have covered so much ground from, the shrinking timeline of nostalgia to how technology is changing how we experience the past.
It has been a fascinating conversation.
Yeah, for sure. And now we're at the point where we can really start to, grapple with some of the bigger questions. Like, what does all this mean for us as we, navigate this increasingly digital world?
That's really the heart of it, and it's not an easy question to answer, but the author does leave us with some thought-provoking ideas to consider, especially when it comes to the role of metaphorical truths in how we understand history.
Yeah, that idea of truthiness over accuracy, it keeps coming up. And for good reason. It seems like the emotional impact of a story often, takes precedence over the nitty-gritty factual details.
Right. And when you think about how we consume history these days, quick hit snippets, memes,
yeah,
it makes sense. We're constantly bombarded with information. It's all about instant gratification.
Totally. So it begs the question, are we losing our capacity for nuance and complexity, or are we just adapting to a new way of learning and understanding the world, a way that prioritizes feeling and connection over, just pure factual accuracy?
Maybe it's a bit of both. We're developing new mental muscles to filter this constant stream of information, but we might also be sacrificing some depth in the process.
It's possible. The author doesn't really give it a definitive answer, but they do urge us to be more critical of the information we consume and to be aware of how our own biases might be coloring, our interpretations of history.
Yeah, for sure.
This whole conversation has really made me think about, my own relationship with nostalgia. It's made me realize that nostalgia isn't just a passive feeling. It's an active process. It's a way of using the past to make sense of the present and even to imagine the future.
I agree. Nostalgia can be such a powerful force. And in a world where information is so readily available, it's more important than ever to be discerning consumers of history. Yeah.
To question our assumptions, to seek out diverse perspectives, and to be willing to go beyond those surface level interpretations that we see so much online.
Right, because ultimately our understanding of the past shapes how we see ourselves and the world. And that's a huge responsibility that we shouldn't take lightly.
Absolutely. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this question to think about. If we're all drawing from this same vast ocean of information, are we becoming more alike in our interpretations of the past? Or are we finding new and innovative ways to express our individuality through nostalgia, even within this shared digital landscape? It's something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into nostalgia. See you next time.